G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks of Ukraine War update for the 23rd of August 2026. I'm your host, the author David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood of Cade, Power Games, Into the Elsebound and Erotic Tales from the Empire. Now, as the war continues, I'll continue to bring you news and comprehensive analysis from both sides of the war. Now, there has been an update to casualties. Now, before we get too deep into that topic, I would like to say and sum this up. The Ukraine war is a paradox of the Ukraine war paradox in my comment section, right, just to be sure, because you might have actually read the description too. And the paradox is, you go first, I might go second. That's not a dig at Russia or Ukraine. It is definitely a dig at both. It is a sharp way to frame the security dilemma, the total breakdown of trust between both sides. Neither the West nor Russia and its allies will trust each other. Even when these trust exercises that have been put forward by Donald Trump work, they don't last. There is always someone. This is not Putin or Zelensky. There's always someone beneath them who will fire. There are enough fanatics in Ukraine that you can't solely blame Russia. The Azov Battalion, who broke the Minsk Accords. The alleged Russian commander who fired a missile, yet no one could produce him. Now, does that mean he does or does not exist? Many claim he was a Ukrainian commander. Both sides have fanatics. Now, could you imagine, let's say the Korean War, could you imagine if Dixiecrats had any power in after the KKK was disbanded by the Republicans? Could you imagine if you had Dixiecrats on the front line in many situations? Do you think they would have not taken potshots? How many potshots have we seen in North Korea over the last 20 years, 30 years? So before you go pointing fingers, let me just point something out to you. I remember the end of the Cold War. I remember 10, 20 in the 90s, declassified documents and intelligence updates where Kennedy was planning, your dear Saint Kennedy, John JFK, was planning terrorist operations in the United States to see if he could spark a war against Cuba. McNamara, MK Ultra program, Operation Paperclip. I could get into trouble if I keep on, because YouTube doesn't want you to know history, real history. Just search declassified intelligence updates. False flag events confirmed. Operation Dark Star. Historical footage, I think, since 2014 at least. Now, you may hate the mainstream media, but there are those amongst the mainstream media who realize they are now creating historical documents, and they are trying to document events, even if the majority will never see them, because there are later issues that have arisen where people now are contesting historical events. And we're not talking about whether Cleopatra, Jesus, or any of those. I'm talking about recent times. I'm talking about what really happened in the exchange at Checkpoint Charlie. What happened with the smuggling of children of the Soviet Union. What happened to all the what was declassified about the and still classified about the Bolsheviks. Did you know it's alleged that after Stalin's death, a lot of the Bolsheviks left Russia and became rich Americans? That's alleged, by the way, under new names. It's all history repeating all over again, cycle after cycle. It is believed that rich Ukrainians and rich Russians are both using this war for their own personal gain, despite sanctions. Because it is so easy for them to hire others to be their proxies in India, Bangladesh, Sudan, to carry out weapons exchanges, etc. The oversight of intelligence apparatuses have many people questioning what is really going on, because we now know, oh, this was just a rogue intelligence operation, has been the latest excuse of many governments. And we only have to look into the failures of intelligence if you really want to dig into that mess and see how long that list is. So, the best open source information gathering, unfortunately, is in the hands of the UN. And that is, so take it with a grain of salt that I have searched many alternative sources to come up with the following: independent casualties, international monitoring bodies, and open source data intelligence networks have provided verified data metrics on both civilian and military casualties for both Ukraine and Russia. They have used video creator mapping. Now, basically, they've used visual data run through AIs, because there's no way thousands of hours of footage per day of funerals, social media posts, can be read by a human, or enough humans. The CIA have been using AI and intelligence operations since the first AIs were put together. I mean real AIs. I don't mean chatbots. I mean real AIs. Machines that will blow your mind if you're allowed to ever see them, maybe in 100 years. However, mapping out these complexities took months to get today's data. Most current data is actually just quoted as mid-2026. So take it with a grain of salt. This is somewhere between June, July, August that this data was only just published, but it may have ended the count somewhere then. So, but the UN says at least their count ended at the end of the July surge. And that surge cost 430 civilians and 2,610 injured. That's just for July. That's the highest casualties documented since March 2022 per month. That's their peak. Up to then, monitors verified 293 civilians and 1,990 injured. So civilians killed, and that was June. For the first 6 months, the UN has confirmed 1,396 civilians killed, 7,978 injured. That's an upward trend in the same periods for 2024 and 2026. Remember, this is civilians only, and they did not distinguish between Russian or Ukrainian or any other ethnicity in the regions. This is the conflict or result of the conflict. Now, there is a breakdown of casualties that says missiles and drones account for 38% of total casualties. Heaviest impact are urban areas far from the front line. This includes Kiev and Moscow. First-person short-range drones account for 27% of civilian casualties. So even though these are drones that are meant to only be targeted at soldiers, human-operated drones by both sides are deliberately going, oopsies. And I said deliberately, and I didn't say which side. I said, this is data about condemning both sides. The UN rarely does this. So when they do this, take it with a grain of salt, that this might be the actual time the UN decided, you know what, I'm not going to take a side in this. Well, they're not supposed to. Now, aerial bombardments, they spiked 143%. But they only caused 105 deaths only, but still. And 753 injuries. I would say the majority of those would be Ukrainian in the frontline areas. And remember, civilian volunteers are counted as civilian casualties as well. They're not counted as military casualties. Both sides have a massive civilian volunteer army. And it is actually referred to by both sides as a civilian volunteer army. And they are counted as civilian casualties. Territorial deaths. Russia occupied territory. The UN has only been able to officially verify 25 civilians killed and 50 injured by Ukrainian shelling in July 2026. However, the UN explicitly notes that access to Russian-controlled areas and information is heavily restricted. The true civilian casualties in those specific areas, especially Crimea, are much higher than can be independently verified. Now, remember, this is not killed by Russians. These are Russians killed by Ukraine in occupied territories. So the Russian casualties are down, whereas they're saying the Ukrainian casualties are as close as possible, humanly possible, accurate. Because there are times that deaths are not reported or recorded as war casualties. Now, a lot of this data is disputed. But open source intelligence, arbitrary tracking, and intelligence aggregators, including Russia Matters, the Institute for the Study of War, the UN, and many other organizations who are working independent of each other, comparing notes, have put together military casualties. Now, the Independent Assessment Project the Independent Assessment Project puts total Russian military deaths, losses, this is killed and wounded, is only just reached 1 million in the total period. That's 2022 to July 2026. Now, the highest offensive operation, which lasted for 40 days, resulted in 42,860 Russian casualties. That was a peak. Ukraine can only be independently estimated. The killed and wounded do not include the estimated 300,000 missing. The Ukrainian military losses are estimated between 250,000 and 300,000 personnel. Now, remember, this does not include, and this probably is short by an estimated 300,000 foreign military agents, civilian militias, or territorial guards. This is only Ukrainian military. Some organizations claim that the 300,000 to 600,000 MIA are in fact deaths in the Ukrainian territorial guards, which are sometimes counted as civilian deaths, or not counted at all, or counted as MIA for months at an end. And don't forget, Ukraine doesn't retire its wounded. So what happens is they get wounded, and then they're dead. So while the Ukrainian casualties may appear low, many say their death rate is higher, whereas with the Russians, it's around 70% casualties and 30% killed, because they tend to not retire anyone except for, well, they have 7 categories, and 1, 2, and 3 are light, and they cycle those through other duties. 4 and 5, they may find a desk job from. If not, then they put them into some sort of, they try to find, to keep them in the military for as long as they can, but they're not returning to the front line. 6 is pretty much return to civilian life, and I think 7 is permanent infirmment, also, where they're in medical care. Yeah, and those numbers are not broken down, by the way. It is only an estimate that 70% of Russian casualties are alive, but in what state? It ranges from category 1 to 7, whereas Ukraine, it's estimated 70% of their casualties are dead. So take it with a grain of salt that there is more to these numbers on both sides, because we also don't have the deaths for North Koreans, all the individual organizations from Chechnya and Colombia and other organizations, even the Indian, who claim every month we hear about Indian volunteers apparently being recalled by Modi. So take it with a grain of salt that India is playing Western media for fools. And I know a lot of you say, no shit. But if you want to know how this information is put together, if not, just advance a few minutes. Don't look, I'm tired of people complaining and stopping the video. Why don't you just advance a few minutes to other stories? Because this, I know it's a waffle. But digital inspection, data scrapping, is by automated scripts. Human teams gather the information and they feed it to AIs, because the data they rely on, death notices, radio announcements, use of websites, frequently publish announcements about local soldiers' deaths for funeral arrangements. They actually get photos from people, such as school memorial plaques. A lot of local schools in Ukraine are being renamed, and they have heroes' walls, and they count them, and they know these numbers are bigger than Zelensky's 39,000, or 40,000, or 45,000, or 40,000, or 50,000, depending on the mood. Even his own staff have contradicted that with 55,000 deaths. And that's nowhere near what open source says. So, also social media. They crawl social media accounts for friends, family, and comrades grieving losses, as well as accounts that go inactive, and compare data. Official decrees. Awards such as Russian Order of Courage and other posthumous awards are posthumous. So if they're awarded, they know they'd absolutely confirmed 100% dead. There's also grave hunters. Open source has recently been cracked down on Russia for doing this. You may have heard about a recent arrest in Moscow of an alleged spy. Actually, it was a grave hunter. He was taking photos of graves and was arrested by Russia as a Ukrainian spy. He was not. He was a Romanian citizen taking photos of cemeteries for confirmation of deaths. So Russia is cracking down on grave hunting, but cemeteries across Russia and Ukraine are monitored for growth. And this is actually where the CIA has actually come in. The CIA doesn't just do nefarious operations. They do actually provide a lot of useful data to organizations who pay for it. And they have access to the NRO and other organizations within the US government who track this stuff for US government reports. And they do provide the UN with estimates based on the changes to graveyards. So your tax dollars at work. Now, reefs and ribbon analysis. Now, military units and specific military units have specific operations. They basically go out, retrieve remains, and carry out. This is the graveyard shift of the military. And they are volunteers, and they are monitored. They work with the UN. They work with the Red Cross. They routinely carry border. They routinely drive bodies backwards and forwards across the border, and they independently report this to the UN. And the UN data is months behind, but it's still strict verification criteria. So any report that doesn't have a legal name, that cannot be verified as having a location, whether they're buried or where they died, or where their funeral was held, and there must be at least a primary official source, a direct photograph of the grave, or with social media, they must trace back to a verified. So this leaves us to, why is there so many estimates? Well, the hidden deficit. We know Ukraine has between 300,000 and 600,000 dead or missing that are not included in this data, because the open source intelligent opening ignores that verified obituaries are only estimated to be 45 to 65% of true casualties. Occasionally, hackers and whistleblowers have provided us with huge lists, and still some of this isn't verified. It says Ukraine has lost almost as much as Russia, is not that far behind. Why this matters for you? Well, do you really want to go through this every month, over and over again, where I put out data and it gets challenged? So, if you are going to constantly cut out because you don't like the news, but you keep coming back, why don't you just skip ahead a little bit? Why don't you learn to take bad news? A lot of people can't take bad news. I'm not telling you the casualties because I'm gleeful. I'm telling you the casualties so you know what a waste of time this war is. And my opinion is, Ukraine says, you go first and I might go second. No, comrade. I will, if there's going to be a ceasefire, you go first and I might go second, says Putin. You got to remember something. These two men, Putin and Zelensky, have known each other for a long time. They're both members of the WEF. No, and you know the first rule of the WEF? Thou shalt not talk about our time in the WEF. Why is an actor in the WEF, World Economic Forum? What is his contribution? He is not an actor. He is an agent, turned into an actor. That's why you can find so little on him as an actor. And since when have actors not been used as state agents? Just look up travelling troops. It goes all the way back to the medieval era, where the Genoan princes used travelling troops to spread their influence throughout Italy for their rebellion against Austria. Or the British. Or the Americans. Travelling troops, yeah. Why do you think why do you think this war is so complicated? Do you agree with the fact that I call it the Ukrainian paradox, or you think the Russian-Ukrainian paradox. But either way, this is a condemnation of both sides. Now, also, going forward, after we go over the Ukrainian map, we're going to look at the growing missile threat to Ukraine, Ukraine's modernization of old equipment to increase mechanized warfare, and how a lot of their mechanized units are actually remote controlled. Russia's drone strike on Kryvyi, the Zelensky's hometown. By the way, Zelensky is ethnically Russian, not ethnically Ukrainian. And there's actually technically no such thing as an ethnic Ukrainian. There's either an ethnic Russian, or there's a Slav with Russian blood, or a Slav without Russian blood in Ukraine. That's it. The Rus are a minority in Russia. There aren't that many of them. Most Russians are not pure Russian. After all, Putin's a Cossack, or allegedly a Cossack. I think he's ethnically mixed. Like, well, there aren't many. Because don't forget, the Mongols were not pleasant people to be occupied by. Ukraine has launched its largest aerial attack on Russia, which resulted in 6 civilian deaths, according to PBS. Now, from the Russian side, Russia is actually going to be telling us about their attacks on Ukraine, their assessment of the Zelensky government and corruption, what's going on with Ukrainian conscripts in Germany. As I said, when it comes to English translation of European news, the Russians love to do it, because the best propaganda, of course, is the truth. And yeah, another story on Russian targeting in Ukraine. And whether or not you believe it, it's still, I think, to be fair and independent, you have to hear news from both sides. So, as we look at the map going forward, as I said, missile attacks on Kiev are up. There's the attack on Kryvyi. Now, they're only reporting drone attacks on Zaporozhye. And again, these are drone attacks on Ukrainian logistics. These are attacks on, again, Ukrainian logistics. But remember, a lot of these warehouses and fuel depots are in civilian areas. They are scattered across Ukraine. And of course, there's no such thing as precision artillery. You can try, but there's going to be a lot of casualties. And of course, as we see, there's continued shelling, cross-border shelling. New areas opening up all the time. No change to the actual progress of the war, though, as you can see. Fighting in the buffer zone. In southern Kupiansk, the Russians make small gains, continuing fighting in the last bit of Lugansk. And as we look at Donetsk, there is only small gains, most of which your eye perceives small changes to the map, but your brain dismisses them as insignificant, and that is true. They are only insignificant gains, and a lot of the time, it takes sometimes weeks or months before the map updates in your brain and go, wow, Russia's grabbed what? Another 0.2% or something. But you actually eventually, over time, over the course of the last month, it's more like being 0.3, 4, 5, 0.4 probably. It hasn't been that much. But over months, it is continually adding up to the point, right? It starts at 18, 19, And it's estimated somewhere between 19 to 21, depending on the estimates, because there are pockets of resistance. But on some maps, these are insignificant because they say they can't live there. These are shelled out, and the war ends, the troops will leave, and it would most likely fall into the hands of the Russians because no one can live there. Not until it's bulldozed, all the munitions are pulled out. Now, this is contended exactly how much the Russians control and how much the Ukrainians control. Remember, these maps are put together from battlefield reports that are from 12 to 48 hours old, with new reports being added as markers of approximate locations, which these could be clashes, these could be artillery, this could be the source of bombardment or the target of bombardment. They rarely tell you. Sometimes they're just Ukrainian official notes just mentioning 20 towns, Russian artillery, and it mentions 20 towns. Some of them are on the Ukrainian side, some of them are on the Russian side. The Ukrainian military are not very good at compiling reports because they don't want to help the enemy. You don't think Russia knows where their artillery is and what they fired at? The Ukrainian excuses are so wearing thin. And as we go around the map, you just see less. It gets quieter and gets less activity. And it's been the same. The question mark is, you're going to say, then how did Russia capture some towns over the last month in this region? As the swamp waters from the release of the dam, as this green area shrinks, Russia is moving up. They're just taking the positions that Ukrainians abandoned in these green areas as the swamp dries out, as their bulldozers advance. No one knows. It's estimated that tens of thousands died when Ukraine released the dam waters, and then a month later the Ukrainians blamed the Russians. Dams in Ukrainian territory. They say, oh no, Russia blew it up. Yeah. Russian agents spent 12 hours unmolested, unchallenged. No one came to investigate what they were doing as they planted explosive charges on critical infrastructure. Yeah, I really believe you, Ukraine. I'm sure other people out there believe you too, because they've got flags in their bios and just don't want to believe bad news about Ukraine. The kind of people out there who only want constant candy, Now, on the Russian side, a lot of drones reported, but a lot of these stories are old. They're not new. The only new story is an allegation that Ukraine, this comes from the Atlantic, that Ukraine was going to launch a massive drone attack at airports. And over the last 6 to 12 months, we have seen Russia closing airports because Ukrainian drones fly over them routinely. But they were planning a wave of 600 AI drones across Russia. But apparently, because the operation was leaked and the Russian air defenses were lit up like a Christmas tree, they cancelled the operations. And then 12 hours later, Zelensky called the news article a conspiracy theory that Ukraine was not engaged in such operations and Ukraine never targets civilians. Then they clarified that 12 hours later when asked about wildberries, claiming that wildberries is a military contractor. They routinely supply body armor, helmets, and other equipment to Russians. And I say to that, what is Amazon? Go look up Amazon. Go look up Amazon deliveries to Ukraine. Amazon drones to Ukraine. So Chinese drones via Amazon, yes. So what we have, again, is the paradox, the hypocrisy and paradox that is Ukraine. So before we go to the news stories, Empire Vows, that's one word, empirevows.myshopify.com is your one-stop shop for enchanting treasures based on my writing. Thank you for your purchase. Everything supports the channel, whether it's new microphone, new headset, or that badly needed upgrade to my computer. As video editing, and although is rare, I admit that most of the stories are recorded live. I rarely edit out glitches and mistakes because I can't process video over 30 minutes long unless I get myself some more memory. And as you know, in Australia, memory is expensive. It's like $300 now, something per stick, and I need 3 more sticks of memory, and I need a bigger SD drive. Well, actually 2. I got 2 slots. So, yeah, and of course, by the time I probably save enough to update my computer with these, I may have to actually, the stuff may not be available. My computer is a little out of date. I admit that, but if I don't update it in 6 to 12 months, then I'll just have to take all that savings and put it in into another computer. So, which is, yeah. But we'll see what happens. Thank you to all those who do support the channel, by the way. I know it's not, I know most people can't afford, they're living paycheck to paycheck. Guess what? We all do. So, I thank you to those who give a buck. Now, Ukraine is braced for an increase in missiles. Russia has prepared, allegedly, 200 missiles for an overnight attack. 77 missiles were fired at once, with as many as 200 in the entire salvo. These overwhelmed Ukraine's air defenses, and now rather than one shot, they were spread over. Normally they would be spread over days. Yeah, sometimes over a week. Russia is ramping up how many missiles per day it produces and has recorded a record 351 missiles for July. But they have not kept this number up. They have spread it out. But it's still, this is record high. And as you can see, they concentrate their missile attacks on key targets. But there are attacks all across the front, hitting military vehicles, around 8 to 10 per day. A lot of missiles, remember, most of them are only just there to penetrate, to get Ukraine's defenses worn out so that at least one will get through. It's like firing. Imagine you got a small hole in a wall. Okay, and you got a handful of rocks. You throw them at that hole. One, you'll see. Most times, one will get through. Small rock, much smaller than a hole. You throw them at the rock. Yeah, that's sort of the analogy. Now, they have capacity to launch more than 77 missiles of various types at once. Their single simultaneous salvo has been measured at 200, and they usually launch half of that at once. Yeah. And they're spread, this attack now has been spread over the last 3 days. The aircraft have run multiple sorties. Russia is ramping up. They're nowhere near America's launch capabilities, and just so you know, Soviet era BMPs, they are still quite capable. They are 15 millimeters, even though they're 15 millimeters of composite armor, they will still stop up to a 50 cal. Now, some 12.7 millimeters do break through because they're armor-piercing rounds, and designed specifically to fight other combat vehicles. But remember, these are still better than some of the modern armored cars, which have proven to be stressed aluminum, paper thin, and not worth the $1 million. You might as well have taken that $1 million and set it on fire. But the Ukrainian BMP was actually, Soviet was actually built for a different war. Though they are somewhat ceramic and can probably only stop a bullet once or twice, you get 1,000 of these, which they have several thousand of. And so you actually get, and of course you add a 30 millimeter Spanish Guardian turret, 30 millimeter, and you now have something that cost only $100,000 to put on the battlefield instead of $1 million. Though they can't build them anymore, the factories, they're struggling to repair them, but it's more cost effective, and they are somewhat regenerable. They can still, weld and gear them up. So there you go. You've got a modern turret sitting on a butt ugly battlefield mobility protection. It's all it is mobility and protection for troops. It's a backup. But what are they doing with the much older BRDMs, of which they have an estimated 2,000, according to some sources, more or less. Some only put them at 500. But what do they do with them? They can't recycle them. They cost too much to recycle. They were used as training vehicles and targets for training. They used to sell a few every year to the Americans in the last, since 2014, I guess, sell a few every year for the Americans to calibrate their and live weapon fires. Romania and others do it as well. Poland is using their own as target training as well. But right now, Ukraine is turning them into remote control guns. You know what you can do? Slap a radar on it, couple of SAMs, couple of target trackers, and you got yourself anti-drone tanks. Now, I dispute this range. That would only be achieved if you had Starlink in your... Why? It's line of sight. Now, as reported by almost every media, Zelensky's hometown got attacked again, and, of course, out come it's cowardly, deliberate attack. Ukraine launched its largest aerial attack on Russia, by the way, and they pummeled the Russians. Can you see the bias in the media yet? Both are civilian targets. This, a warehouse in Moscow. This, a shopping mall. What is the difference? You telling me that every warehouse in Moscow is military? Why would the... Yeah. Yeah, that's... Yeah. Now, as I said, Russia's actually telling us about their targets. And they openly admit they are targeting fuel stations, refueling. Now, technically they are refueling stations. Damaged or completely destroyed in the last 6 months. Now, Ukraine's corruption. This is a reprint of a story. German. He's well known for his Substack and articles on corruption and other and historical events. And he has focused on Ukraine, no doubt. But the scandal in Ukraine is focusing now on Zelensky's chief of staff. Why is that? Because until recently, he was the head of Ukrainian intelligence. And again, like so many in the Ukrainian government, they have no prior experience in the fields they are given. And they have some of them are only in their 30s. You'd expect a government minister to be 45 plus. Experienced. This should be built into every constitution. Unless there is a national emergency, it should be the following criteria. Blah, de, blah, de, blah, de, blah. Right? There should be a criteria. And this is a living document that updates. Part of every country's constitution should be a living document that updates according to the will of the people, not according to the will of the government. In legalese, what's happening in Ukraine is criminal negligence by those who monitor corruption, that is within the government. See, the prosecutor's office should not be hunting for corruption. They should be getting told by the minister, hey, we have shortages, we have problems, our audit is indicating money missing. Please find it. So the SBU has to investigate and then investigate. So they have to find that there's a crime. Then they are being burdened and slowing everything down. And in the meantime, $3-4 million in dirty money just disappears. Because once they start investigating, because the ministers know they're in on it. They're not monitoring for corruption. They're monitoring for investigations. That is the allegations. They're turning the military press gangs. They're turning a blind eye to the territorial guard engaged in their own illegal press gangs. That they are militias, not official military. So they're not government. It's not our responsibility. You're the government. Your job is oversight. If these militias are engaged in criminal activity, you're supposed to direct prosecutors to take action, not dismiss it as, oh well, national security. Otherwise, you end up like this, a senior aide taking the fall. I don't like her, but I also don't know her. So how could I know her well enough to not like her? Well, she's a sour person who says horrible things about people. That's all I need to know. But it doesn't mean I think she deserves to be the fall guy for her boss's incompetence or other ministers' incompetence. At best, the Ukrainian government is incompetent, and at worst, beyond redemption. It's somewhere in the middle. But there is no innocence I don't mean in the sense that all ministers are corrupt, but I'm saying the entire government, not just the president, not just the ministers, but at the parliamentary level as well. The parliamentary level of Ukraine seems to be the most locked in step sycophants since World War II. I have not seen this level where almost every bill is 100% backed. You do not. That's no opposition. That I haven't seen that. That's 1930s Germany, 1920s France, Victorian England. You do not see functional democracies with but fluctuating between 100 and 99% support for the president. It never happens in a real functional democracy. There is always an average of 30% contrarians to any cause, no matter how noble. There's always a contrarian who questions it or is skeptical. Or merely votes for attention. But this is not new. Every month, men desert, claim to be abused, and in many cases, they are put on TPAs. And in some cases, they are shipped to Canada or not many to Australia or New Zealand. Mostly Canada, but I forget, but they only, France France has really slowed down, so has England, and Poland takes almost none. There aren't many. Uh, there aren't many. Like, this was really a handful, but 10 in one unit, 10 in 1 month is a little high compared to other months. That's the only reason why I bring it up. It is a translation of a German article in Die Jolt, and the only reason why I bring it up is I don't want to die for a war that he doesn't. I don't want to kill. It's usually the case. It's not so much the lack of patriotism. It's they don't want to die. They know the death rate is much higher than the government. And it's the same in Russia. Look up Georgia. You look it up. I think Georgia has taken in some Russians. Azerbaijan, not that many, but there are a few as well on the Russian side. There's also been a few surrenders to Ukraine, and they've been, I think, housed in Romania or something. I should have checked on that because I do think they actually might have stopped that. I think they might have stopped, telling them, hey, I'm sorry, but we're not taking any more Russians. I think in the last 3 months, that hasn't been verified. But there is an article that was put out that Russian asylum seekers have been diverted to third countries. But that's also marked as not verified. Again, that could be because of the way Russia has, the fanatics in Russia. Don't forget, it's not just Putin, right? If someone really wants to be nasty in the intelligence services, they can almost guarantee to get away with it. If later someone deems it a national interest, or no one knows, or there's no report, or no confirmation. But raining down on fire, if Russia could do this every day, it would be really sad news for Ukraine. Right now, Russia can only do this at best every few days. And most of the time, it's a rocket barrage, not multiple rocket barrages. But they are sending long-range rockets up to the front line. Well, these aren't 122s. These are 130. These are at least the one. These may be a. Is it? This looks a bit bigger than 130. Could be a but they are equivalent to about a HIMARS. They have between 300 to 500 kilometer range. I think they're 250 or 300 millimeter rockets. They carry only about 8, although this looks more like 4. It could be 8. Yeah. They are more akin to artillery in their travel, in that once they're fired, they only burn the motor to the arc, and then the rest of the arc is like an artillery shell. And that's very imprecise, by the way. And that's why you get other things other than their intended target hit. Because so many times Russia is not using precision guided, and they say they are, but we know, the likelihood. Plus, what happens when Ukraine shoots down the laser guidance for these precision guided munitions? They go just standard. They go for as far as long as they can. And don't forget, with half their rocket motor burnt out, they're not going to be very precise when they reach their arc. They're just going to fall. Yeah, this is going to arc like an artillery shell. So they're going to be random when they hit. So sometimes you have to take the hit, but it's a decision that Ukraine rather not make, I guess, hoping they can shoot it down, and more likely. But Russia's trying to pound the ports, and of course that's resulting. But this is yesterday. This attack was launched 17 hours ago, and as you can see, nope. We're talking about down here. Gosh, yeah. Cross-border trade, nothing. They don't report it. So, new. Is that new? No. Well, I didn't think so. But no. Yeah. Nothing's changed. So, yeah. I would estimate about half the missile strikes are not reported. It's just what it is. And eventually, I know these videos hopefully will help contribute to the project to properly document this war as best as possible, because the truth matters. The truth helps you make decisions that lead to better outcomes. If you allow lies and candy stories to dominate your thinking, you allow this grey area to grow, where illegal actions are taken under the protection of your deliberate action to ignore the truth. I'm talking about Europe in particular, who often dismisses cases of war crimes by Ukraine as Russian disinformation, rather than stopping to think, is this a rogue commander? We could go look at the school. The UN went and looked at all the allegations. And they even though this place was, one of them was hit by 32 drones, they said, there was no proof that this was a deliberate targeting of civilians. There's no military activity in a teaching school. They teach teachers to Chinese students. And originally it was operated by Ukraine. It was taken over by the provincial government. It wasn't even taken over by Russians. It was taken over by locals. But even when you try to research some things, you always run into that wall of, once the UN says there's no case, there is no case. You can't look at the evidence and decide for yourself. So there will never be a reckoning for Ukraine, because of the British, because of the French, because of the German governments. They're trying to pressure America into submission to Europe, thinking America only is obligated to protect Europe. That's it. And do Europe's bidding. That's it. They want to redefine NATO as, you are our attack dog. You carry out our foreign policy. And now you know why they like Democrats, because they are willing sycophants to power. It is not a mutual beneficial arrangement anymore. And some would argue it never was. But that doesn't mean that everyone in NATO agrees with the foreign policy of Macron, Merkel. Don't tell me Merz is in charge of Germany, okay? And don't tell me Andrew Burnham is in charge of the UK. He is just like every Prime Minister. You can look up Theresa May interview. Every Prime Minister before and after Theresa May was a sycophant to the establishment and taking all their marching orders from the Bank of England. And when she refused, they ousted her. And later, they implemented everything she suggested, except for the 20% cuts to the private sector funding, I think, which would have cut the English budget. Yeah. Why? Because banks operate on your governments borrowing money off them. Their wages come from you borrowing money off them. The banks are not independent. They are selfish. They are not operating in the public interest. Reserve banks must be privatized. They are not private. They're in the hands of a cartel. They should not be operated by the Rothschilds or anyone else. They should be operated by their nations solely for the purpose of absorbing the excess in good times to redistribute to government services in the bad times. They should only be the government bank. That's it. And if they borrow from their reserves, it has to be conditional and limited and repayable like any other loan. Now, America's debts are backed by bonds, and recently that's why America has spent a lot of money, because they're buying back their bonds, because they don't want the threat of China or Europe doing a bond dump and crashing the US economy. And yes, Scott Bassett is right. A lot of reporters are underreporting or lying about the state of the US economy, and the economy doing better than it was 4 years ago and 4 years before. Let's be honest, it was still doing better than Biden's economy was still better than the Obama economy. And you notice how they always skip the Trump economy, but Biden's economy was always compared to, so all these people wanting Obama back, well, Biden did a better job in the economy. And then you realize, if you actually realize what the president contributes to the economy is negligible compared to what Congress, and for now, Congress is afraid of the results of its own actions. So yes, they would love to, especially the Senate, would love to blame Trump for all disasters. But there are many factors that are outside of your control. And one of them is the Ukraine war. No matter how much you say, the only way you are going to affect the Ukraine war is to drop one big mother trucking load on top of Kiev and say, now is the war over? Oh, because like I said, the paradox of the Ukraine war is you go first, we may go second. Might. And so far, we've had the Minsk Accords broken by both sides. We've had ceasefires broken by people on both sides. And all we get from Zelensky is lip service to peace. Because if he was serious, he would have rounded up the territorial commanders a long time ago and had them shot. Because they should not have independent territorial commanders still able to fire on the front lines in a ceasefire. And that is what's... And again, you didn't want to give up this. Had you given up that, you wouldn't have lost that and a million lives. But see, there are too many people out there who say, but it's only a million dead Russians. And that's the problem, isn't it? They forget about the million dead Ukrainians. And again, even the own stats say that might be as low as 300,000, but you're also not taking into account displaced persons, suicides, murders, and the 300,000 a year that go missing in Ukraine, never to be seen or heard from again. There is a war against humanity going on, and all people seem to care about is having the Ukraine bio in their flag and being told they're stunning and brave. The bottom 2%, folks. You want to spot the bottom 2%? It's not just drug users. Start with the people who cheer a baby killer. Kill baby. Start with the pro-abortion movement, the eugenicists, aka white liberal women who support the woman who killed her kids. Start with that. That's the bottom 2%. So, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. You can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below, in my profile. Scan the QR code on the screen. Appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.